Welcome back. We
Hello.
are here on episode 6,
Ooh.
and we happen to still be in Australia here. It's evening time here, but we've gone through a few chaotic days here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say the last probably 4. We actually had if you didn't know, there's a cyclone actually that went through the east coast of Australia the last few days. So mainly through Brisbane. We're in Gold Coast, and Brisbane and Gold Coast were kind of the main culprits of that cyclone. And
Mm-hmm.
so we've been indoors for a few days here now. It's been pretty pent up in our house. We haven't been able to do much. Everything's pretty much closed. We could drive around, but outside of driving around or walking around in the streets while it's raining and super windy, there really hasn't been much stuff for us to do. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a long 4 days, I would say. The first few were more of just like an inconvenience because of the weather, but there was the one evening where it actually, like, the peak of the storm came through Gold Coast, and it was a little bit sketchy and nerve-wracking. The sounds of the winds definitely did some damage. It was very hard to sleep that night. I know for both Aaron and I, we were lying there. We had taken the mattresses out, like trying to find something to do with the kids. We moved all the mattresses out into the living room, and they were like using it essentially like a jungle gym. And then we had a movie night sleepover out there in the living room. And the night of the worst part of the storm, both Aaron and I were like, I'm not going to be able to sleep. Like, we need to put a show on, and I need to fall asleep to this show because I can't fall asleep to the sound of these winds. It was pretty intense. I'm not sure I've ever really felt that before.
There's like a pot with flowers behind me, and it was when we were sleeping that night on Friday. It was like rattling. Like the
It
thing
was
was
shaking
like
the
maybe
whole building.
6 inches
Yeah.
or a foot from my head, and the building was shaking. So this pot with these leaves were just like rustling against each other, like literally nonstop. And it just kept reminding me, hey, the building's shaking. Not to mention all the like little noises. I mean, there's gaps in the doors from the winds that are
Oh,
like 80
yeah.
kilometers an hour. It was quite hectic. But to be honest, outside of that, I actually haven't thought it's been that insane. Like, I mean, well, from back home, I've never been in a hurricane in Florida or anything. I just see it on the news, and maybe this is the same where you see it on the news and it's very different than what you experience. But
Mhm.
I haven't seen like roofs go flying or like trees being picked up or cars being thrown. Like, I haven't seen any of that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's obviously some damage that's done, but it's largely just like tree branches that are broken off and
Yeah.
slung onto the road, or like a ditch has overflowed with water. I mean, you're getting like
There's some
100
flooding in some
plus
places.
mils in 2 days. Like, it's a lot,
Mhm.
but it's been an inconvenience to our life in the last 4 days, but largely, I mean, there's a pool area here at the building, like indoor, outdoor gyms, all kinds of stuff. And they've had to shut it down. So really, there's not much for us to do here at the moment. And the
Yeah.
kids just kind of go AWOL inside after a while. So
Yeah.
fortunate enough, yesterday we found an indoor playground nearby, and we decided to drive the 25 minutes to go and play in there, which was really
Yeah.
nice because they could actually just go crazy with other kids for 2 or 3 hours. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that
That
was
was
nice.
perfect. But yeah, I know. And I mean, we're some of the lucky ones. Like, we didn't lose any power, fortunately. So that was a big help. And we did lose hot water for like 3 days. So that was the only inconvenience, I would say, is that we didn't have hot water for hot showers and stuff like that. But other than that, we've been really fortunate. So we made it through. We're out on the other side. We actually got out today and went to go see like some of the damage that's been done. What's happened to the beaches is actually insane. Like, all the sand that has been removed
Yeah,
from the beaches is crazy. There's probably like a
that
15-foot
is.
drop from the edge of the beach that you used to just be able to walk onto. So that is wild. And yeah, I mean, there's some like flooding in places around here, but nothing that's really impacted us. So all in all, we kind of came out unscathed, but it was a few rough days for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is the craziest thing to me of all this, is just the
Yeah.
erosion of the beach, just slowly over time, taking sand by every wave coming up and just turning into like I mean, you can go look at either of our Instagrams, just pictures on stories or
Yeah.
whatnot, but it's literally like a 15-foot cliff in places. And everywhere you
Yeah.
go, it's at least 8 feet. Like, it's a straight
Yeah.
down cliff of sand that's just been eroded, with just
Yeah.
tons of sand. But I talked to a lifeguard today, and she was saying like it could take them a year to fix this.
Yeah.
Just the beach, like just the beach, to get the sand back into
How it
shore,
was. Yeah.
using barges and throwing the sand back into the shore, or sometimes they pipe it force it through pipes from different locations around. Like, it's a huge thing. I mean, and the amount of sand is just incredible that's gone. So
And
I
it's
could
not
see it
just like, I mean,
taking a year.
with a storm like this, it's not just like you've had some massive surge that's come and hit up one area. It's like the whole coast for
Yeah.
like hundreds of miles have been hit by
2 hour drive, you could see that.
Yeah. So it's, they're going to have a lot of work to do, which is a bit unfortunate because, obviously we love to be here for the beaches too. So those are kind of up in arms a little right now.
A
But
once in a 50-year thing. So
yeah, literally they haven't had a
very,
cyclone here in 50 years. So of
very
course we're
unique
here.
experience. All right. So let's get into what we're going to chat about
today's
today.
episode.
We have an interesting topic. Well, at least according to us, it's quite interesting because it's something we've thought a lot about over obviously the last 14 years we've been together. And we've mentioned it at different parts of the podcast, different episodes already, but we're very different people, like personality wise. In lots of ways, we're like almost completely opposite. And so what we wanted to do today was just talk about, in this episode, was just talk about like what are some of those differences, places where we're really different than each other, and then maybe how do those like play into our relationship? Are they things that require a lot of work and are negatives and are stressful to us, or are they something that we actually can maybe lean on and say, hey, we're different here, this is a good thing, and how might that be a good thing? So we're going to maybe go through some of these differences, personalities, but I think a good way to portray this to begin is, these are not like I am exactly one way and she is exactly one way on this personality trait, whatever it is. Maybe it's introverted, extroverted. I am clearly more introverted than she is, and she's clearly more extroverted than I am.
Yeah.
But it's on a sliding scale. So it's not like Aaron is here on the left and he is totally introverted, and Asia is over here on the right and she is 100% completely extroverted. I think it's useful to think about this on a sliding scale of like, if you were a 1 to 10, introverted 1, 10 extroverted, where does each person fit on this? Yeah. So I think that's each person is a mix of introverted, extroverted. We're just saying maybe they're more one thing. So rather than just saying there's a label for that person, they're entirely this way, which is never true for anybody. So I thought that would be a good thing just to mention before we start going on this.
I think even too, like, as we'll get into it, you'll see like one person will tend to think this way initially, but it doesn't mean that we can't be swayed or be open to thinking another way too. So I think, like that sliding scale, or like just our inherent tendencies to be a certain way, but also knowing like we're open to, changing our minds in certain things. But I think that's a good way to put it, is we're not just like putting ourselves in a box on this. We're just going to kind of discuss some of the differences between us.
Okay. So why don't you bring up the first one? And
okay. Well, Mike, should I just bring up introverted, extroverted, and we'll just start there? Because that's definitely one of them. Okay. Let's start with introverted, extroverted. So obviously, I am more of an extroverted individual and Aaron is more of an introverted individual. And I would say, so one of the things that we want this podcast to be about is how do we utilize these things in our relationship too? And are they positive or are they negative? Or like, are there pros and cons? And I would say, like, from my perspective, first being with Aaron, I struggled to understand his point of view when it came to social things. And in the beginning of a relationship, when like showing up to events together with your partner is something that is like socially expected of you, or if you're not showing up to things together, if your partner doesn't want to necessarily be at things, it's, society will question certain things. And so I always cared a lot in the early days of our relationship about the external appearances. And so if there was an event and I wanted to go to it, or if there was some sort of party and I wanted Aaron to come with me, I never understood his inherent tendency to just not really have a desire to go. And I also would take it personally. Like, he doesn't want to spend time with me. He doesn't want to be around me or like do the things that I want to do, because I am totally naturally going to want to go to those things. Like, as an extroverted person, I love being around people. I love talking. I gain energy from social environments. And it was really hard for me to understand that someone didn't feel the same way as me. And it caused a bit of a rift for us in the beginning of our, like, for the first, I would say, like 5 years. And it wasn't like a constant rift. It was just one of those things that every now and then would come up and would cause a bit of like emotional distress, mainly for me because I was the one that cared. And Aaron was the one that I don't even want to say that you didn't care. It just was so opposite of what your desires were that it was truly like if you were showing up to things, you were doing it for me, not necessarily for yourself. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, early on for sure.
Yeah.
I'll start with like your assessment of I'm more introverted, you're more extroverted. And I'll take this a step further. I actually think if we were to place us on a scale of like 1 to 10, 1 being, totally introverted and 10 being totally extroverted, I would say that I'm like a 2 or a 3.
Yeah.
Like just by nature that I'm probably a 2 or a 3 on that scale. And I would say that you're somewhere around an 8.
Yeah.
So like,
same.
Without being like super weirdly extroverted or super weirdly introverted, according to me,
Yeah.
I think we're very, very opposite in this way. So like she was describing earlier in our relationship, like how it kind of worked. And I think you're right. It bothered you far more than it ever bothered me.
100%.
Because not going to something with you, I was like, yeah, good, foof, I don't want to go to that, or I didn't care to go.
But it wasn't, again, like knowing now, I'm like, it wasn't that you were going with me. Going with me was not the problem. It was just going at all.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. It could have been whatever. Like if I didn't want to go to something, I would have been like, I don't want to go to that. Like just, I don't want to go to it. Over the years, I have learned, and at times been forced to learn how to be extroverted. Like I can now become somewhat of an extroverted person for a period of time. I can't do it for super long, but I can do it for a period of time. Whether that's, like when I was involved with the golf team, like there were events you'd have to go to and mingle with people for a few hours, and it would happen relatively frequently, like stuff like that, where you have to learn standing up and speaking in front of a bunch of people. You can't sit there in a shell. And so I've had to learn over the years how to become an extroverted person at times. Now, I would say that one of the key differences, and I can't remember where I heard this from, but I would say a key difference in why I would never call myself an extroverted person versus you calling yourself an extroverted person is I like when I go to a social thing or when you go to a social thing, you get like energized from that. Being around other people, whatever it is they're doing, you like get something out of that. Like you get energy from it. You feed off that. It drains my soul, which is why I can only do it for so long. Maybe it's 3 hours, whatever, call it 3 hours, but I can only do it for so long before I'm just totally drained, like emotionally, energy. I'm just drained of it. Like it does not give me anything emotion wise. Like it takes a lot out of me to like behave in that way for a period of time. But I didn't do that 14 years ago. That's something I've learned probably in the last 10 years. That, which I would say makes it a lot easier in today between you and I, because now I'm much more willing to go out and do some of these things, and be around a lot of other people. It doesn't bother me. I oftentimes actually like to go now. I like to be around and hang out with other people, but it still drains me. Like no matter, I could be with my best friends and it still drains me. It doesn't matter. It's just, that's kind of inherently a personality, a characteristic of mine, but I am far more on the intrinsic side of things for sure. Like I do get energy from sitting down and reading a book by myself, or just sitting and being quiet and thinking to myself, or writing stuff down, or just some things by myself I need to do, which is something you recognize now. It's something I need to do. It's not an option. It's something that I need to do. Now you understand that. It's not I'm not taking a slight at anybody. I'm doing something that I need to do for me. And I'm not like religious about it. It's not like I need, 2 hours every morning, exactly this time or anything like that. Some days I don't have it. Like that's part of also having kids. Like my schedule is far less important than it used to be when it was just you and I. That's an interesting one, the introverted, extroverted one, that I think over time has taken a real turn from something that caused a bit of issues early on to now I don't think it causes any issues. And I actually think, and this is the case in a lot of these, but I actually think the differences between us cause us to sort of balance out a bit. Like it makes me, like you being super extroverted makes me become a little bit more extroverted, and me being introverted maybe is rubbed off on you and you wanting to sit down and think by yourself for a little bit, half an hour, whatever it is, read a book, just do something quiet by yourself.
Yeah.
So, and maybe this isn't the greatest example of that, this personality characteristic, but I think it's a common theme in that in a lot of ways we're so different that they do rub off on each other and they kind of force us to kind of grow towards the other person's characteristic, which is something naturally neither of us, if you just, asked us subconsciously, it's not something you would want to do. It's something you have to force yourself to do. So yeah, the introverted extroverted one is a very good one to kick it off with. Let's go with another one. I will say optimistic versus pessimistic.
Okay. I mean, I obviously know what this, like who is who in this situation. I'm like, can you guys take a guess? I am for sure more optimistic than Aaron is. Is that what you were going to say too?
What's your reason for
so
that?
I just think
you got to elaborate on it. You can't
okay. So, well, the reason why I say this, so I'm very much like a glass half full person when it comes to looking at problems, even just like thinking of scenarios. I don't know. Maybe, I mean, you might say that this is not true, but I think I'm more of a glass half full. If you come to me with a problem, I am the first person to be like, it's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. Like, I'll also try to help you fix your problem. But at the end, I'm always going to go, everything's just going to be fine. It's going to work out the way that it's supposed to do. Like, I'm very much just always trying to reframe my mind around the positive and like this or something better is kind of like one of the things that I'm always saying in my head, because I just am a firm believer that things are going to work out. And I think that I don't a lot of the times allow myself to even go down the path of there could be a negative outcome from this because I don't want to entertain it. And I don't know if that's maybe like a negative thing because then I'm not prepared for anything negative that could potentially come my way. But I just truly am more of like a glass half full outlook versus you. And I don't know if you want to speak to your tendency or if you want me to speak to it.
Well, you can keep talking about it if you want. I'll have my turn to speak about it.
I would say that Aaron it sometimes reminds me of like a doomsday thinker, but with the intention that if he can think of all of the most negative things that are going to come out of it, that he can be mentally prepared to handle them. So he thinks of like all of the bad things that can happen. So he has solutions already prepared. I just avoid the negative things that could happen and pretend like I'll never have to have a solution for them because they won't come my way.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to say.
Okay, I would rate you as incredibly optimistic. Like you said, to the point of like, why would I think about anything else? It's not even going to happen.
Yeah.
Which I personally don't agree with that. I think that's like, my personal thought is that it's naive to think that everything's going to be fine and always going to be fine. Like that, I don't think there's a human being on planet Earth who's ever experienced that. So that doesn't fly with me.
But I just believe it in like a way that it's shaping you into something. Like everything that's happening is happening for you. So like, even if you're going through something that's crappy, like there's going to be something good that comes out of this on the other side. Like, that's what I mean. Like, it's not that the world and everything is going to be beautiful and perfect all the time. It's just like, if something is happening to you right now, it's happening for you and there will be a journey or a lesson or something that comes out on the other side. And that is what you can take that is positive out of it too.
Yeah, I think exactly the same way on that.
Okay.
But in a more isolated scenario, I think it's very different between you and I.
Yes.
Where you're like,
I'm
yeah,
curious
it's gonna
if
work
you
out.
could give like
Aaron, it's gonna be fine. So I'll just maybe outline the way that I think about this first.
Okay.
So I don't think pessimism is the right word, because being pessimistic is like, I'm super unlucky. Nothing good happens to
I
me.
think
It's
of
going
like
to rain
Eeyore.
tomorrow. My life sucks. And I'm not that person at all. I'm
No,
not.
you're not.
So I think maybe like being realistic is maybe a better term there. I don't know what the
I'm
exact term
toxic
is,
positivity.
but
It's real.
so I think in terms, a lot of times I think in terms of like percentages. And one of the things that I believe is if you give like your max effort on something, there's a good chance it will pan out. And I don't think anybody can say 100% of the time you give your ultimate effort, it's going to work out. Like, I don't think anybody would say that. The most successful people on the planet would never say that, because it's just not true, right? It works in a percentage. The odds increase the more effort and time or whatever it is you're doing, you put into that. So when I think of a scenario, that's kind of what I think about. Like, what are the actionable things that I could do to increase my chances of this being a positive? I also like to think about what are the things that could go wrong here, and are they something that I could address before it even goes wrong? So it's a bit of like, okay, something could happen negative, big, small, whatever. Could I negate it before it even has a chance to happen that's negative? So if I don't think about that originally, there's nothing I can do. So that's kind of how I think about it. I actually am an optimistic person. You ask me, if where my life is going to be in 5 or 10, 20 years, I'm very optimistic about that. If you would have asked when I was coaching the golf team if we were going to win tournaments, I'm very optimistic about that, whether the odds were in our favor or not. I have belief in things, but I also at the same time understand that it doesn't matter what you do, it's never going to work out 100% of the time. Or maybe you'll get a small win out of it rather than the gigantuan, reward you thought you were going to get. Both of them are a win. They're different levels of a win, though.
I think too, like, and this is again, I definitely lean more to, I don't want to say like toxic positivity, because I also can address, like, if things are not going well, like I can address that in the moment. But I will say that having someone else who can help me reframe things or view things in a different way and be like, okay, I understand this is what you're trying to do. This is how you're wanting to do it. If this were to come up for you, how would you deal with that? That is where Aaron comes in for me a lot. And so it's not necessarily that we're so different and we can't have these conversations, but I find more so probably than he finds on this, but maybe I'm wrong, that I actually value his outlook in this way, because where I have a tendency to avoid thinking about these things, he will kind of slowly nudge them in a way that gets me to be like, okay, you're right. Okay, this could potentially be something that I have to address down the road, or it might potentially come up. How do I make it not come up at all? Or what do I do to do this? So he's always somebody who I find is really helpful for me to have these conversations with too. So this is a difference between the two of us that I feel like actually adds a lot of value into my life, because it gets me to see things from a different perspective and gets me to just be more mentally prepared of what could come from certain things. I don't know. Do you think that you ever get that the opposite for me?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think this is a better example of people being different in the way that they, personality or thinking, and it being beneficial to both sides. Because, if I were to come to you with a problem that has been hard for me to figure out a solution to, I know that you're going to tell me, it's fine, it's going to be fine. Everything, it'll work out. A solution will come, whatever. Yeah. And it might calm me down for a little bit. You're not going to change the way I think about it. You're not going to cause me to go like, full optimistic person where now I'm sitting going, I don't even need to think about it anymore because it's all going to be good.
It's going to be fine.
I don't see that. But what it does is it gives me like some mental relief in the moment that I don't have to solve it right now. I can let something come to me rather than trying to force some solution here, which is a very helpful thing. So that was the point I was going to make, is just, this is a good example where being very opposite in the way we think actually helps both of us.
Yeah, for sure.
We level each other up. Because I think, to be both overly optimistic people, you would get into like this manic couple every time something happens, good or bad. It would be like, everything's going to be great. It's all great. Everything's going to be great. Yeah. And then you would reinforce that and we would get into this like manic spiral, right? So the
And
fact
then
that
we
we're
wouldn't
different,
know how to solve any problems.
yeah, we would just be walking around permanently believing
It's fine.
everything's going to be
Everything's fine.
perfect.
It's like that meme. Like that meme where like the house is on fire and the little dog is like, it's fine. Everything's fine.
No, I think another point, I was going to give an example, but I'll give an example after this. Another
Okay.
point to me on just being overly optimistic without any reason to be overly, like, without any, like, I don't know, solutions to your problems or facts or anything to back up why you're overly optimistic, is I think it leaves room to be seriously, like your expectations just be shattered, which is
Yeah.
a really difficult thing. I don't care what you're doing, to have expectations of something and then have them just be completely let down is a
Mhm.
really tough thing to deal with.
Right.
And I think maybe from playing golf and trying this for, a long, long time, maybe it's seeped into my thinking in this way where I try to bring down the expectation, like not being overly optimistic about things, having faith that it's going to work out, but not being like overly optimistic that it's going to work out exactly the way I want. And then coming up with solutions to any problems so that it can increase the chance of it working out. So that's kind of because I know even for me, if if I have very high expectations and I feel like I can deal with my emotions pretty well, it is hard to internalize and like, you had it worked up so good in your mind that this was going to work out the way you wanted it to, and it not even close, it works out not even close to that, is a
Yeah.
difficult thing to deal with.
Right.
So for me, it's a little bit of a way to push that aside, like not even have that expectations, conversation. But
Mhm.
the example I was going to give you, asked about an example of us and being just optimistic versus realistic, optimistic, whatever you want to put the other category as. When we were going on our traveling trip here for months on end, I was the one primarily looking at places to stay for sure in the last two places that we've been. So that was
Yeah.
Bangkok, Thailand, and Gold Coast. So I was researching, where would we stay there? Why would we stay there? Are there things to do around there? Do we have a car or not have a car? Are there
Yeah.
things to do without a car, or, do we have to get a car to go and do stuff? And there's a lot of things to think about for it to go well in my mind. And so I spent a lot of time figuring those things out. Had I asked you, you know, what do you want or what do you think? I know you wouldn't go and do that. You would say, you know what, Aaron, whatever you pick, it's all going to be fine. We're all going to have a great time, which is helpful. But that's a difference in the way we would approach that issue or problem or question of where are we going to stay? And
Right.
it's not, I do agree with you in some ways. Yeah, we're going to have a great time no matter where we go, but could we have had a better time if we put in an hour or five researching where to stay? Do they have a great pool? Do they have nice restaurants downstairs right around we can walk to in the evening? Do
Mhm.
they have whatever it might be, right? So I think that's a good example of how, you could find a place to stay. I'm not saying you couldn't find a place to stay, but you
Yeah.
certainly wouldn't do that to find those places.
No, I'm not going to be like looking up. I mean, he goes to the extent of like, how far is this from the train station? Is it walkable? How far is this from another area of transport? What types of transport do they have? Like, he goes as far as to like, it's only 5 minutes from here, and then it's 5 minutes from here, and we can get to all these different places once we walk 5 minutes to this place. So he goes as far as that, which is just something I wouldn't put that
And
effort.
it's not as big of a deal if it was just you and I going, but when we have kids, like
Yeah,
to
it
walk
matters.
5 minutes with kids or 15 minutes with kids is a huge difference in whether
Yeah.
everyone has fun or not. So,
Yeah, true.
okay, do you have a third one or do you want me to
Yeah.
bring up a third
No,
one?
I have one. I have one. And this almost kind of goes with what you're just saying about picking a place to stay. But I'm going to go with assertiveness versus passiveness. And I want you to speak on this first.
Okay. Generally speaking, I would say that you are far more passive and I am far more assertive
Yeah.
on more things, I would say.
Yeah.
So where you most cases you would be more passive. Like, yeah, it's fine. I don't care that much, whatever it might be. There are cases where it matters to you a lot and you are
Yeah.
assertive,
Yeah.
but generally speaking, it's not that way.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, for me, I give my opinion and assert my opinion, or make a decision and assert that decision. And there are fewer things for me that are, sure, it doesn't matter to me, completely passive. So that would be my take on it. I think, again, this one works pretty well for us being different in this way. I don't think, it hardly ever causes a problem. And I think this is partly too, like, we understand each other. I know that if you're like super assertive about something, that it really matters to you, because most of the time that you're not going to do that. So I also know that if you tell me, yeah, I don't care, I'm going to stop asking you if it matters to you, and I'm just going to make a decision, because I don't want to do that for half an hour. You told me once it didn't really matter to you in a roundabout way. I know what that means. I take it and I go and make a decision, and we move forward.
And I think too, like, this was one, like, how I was harder to come to like the introverted side and understand the introverted side. I actually feel like, and I could be wrong here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like for you, this one was hard for you to see for me, because you are so assertive and you're so like matter of fact. And I think, like, he used to do things with me where he would be like, well, it's fine, then why don't you just make the decision? And I would literally be like, this is the worst task you could give me to do right now, because I literally do not care. And I don't want to confuse passiveness with being a doormat, or like having it sound like Aaron just like runs my life, because that's not actually true. I do care about a lot of things. And if I really care about it, like, you better believe I'm going to be really passionate about telling you what I think, what I feel, what my opinions are. And he'll vouch for that, I'm sure. But there are genuinely so many things I don't care about. Like, again, where we stayed in Thailand, he did all this research and like basically presented me with like 3 options. And I was like, okay, cool. They all sound great. Like, that's just kind of who I am. I don't really give a massive opinion. If you ask me where I want to eat for dinner, 9 times out of 10, I could literally care less. It's not about just wanting somebody to like, or allowing someone to just control me. Has nothing to do with that. It genuinely is just like, I don't care for a lot of things. I'm totally fine to just, because it's not the decision that we're doing that matters to me. A lot of the times it's like the people I'm spending it with, or, whatever it is around that event or thing that we're doing. It's not about where we're going or what we're choosing to do at that time. But if there is things that do really matter and I'm passionate about, or I feel a certain way, I absolutely will say them, but it's just not a lot of things.
Yeah, no, it's really not.
And I think that was like the harder one for you to figure out, because you used to always be like, well, you just like tell me, just tell. And I'm like, but I don't care. Like, I really, really don't. It doesn't impact me in any way, whatever decision.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there are, like I said, I think there are very few things, and it might not even happen once a day, but there's few things where you're like decisive about it. This is what I want. And when it's that way, we don't really talk about it. It's just like, okay, then I become, a passive bystander. And unless it's important to both of us or it matters and we discuss it, of course, but we're talking about like, hey, what's for breakfast or something, like, and if you're like, I really want to, I'm having this, I'm not going to say, well, I was hoping you could make us this. I'm just like, okay, then, whereas normally I would make what I want to make, but I don't argue on those kinds of things.
No.
But generally speaking, I would say I'm far more assertive on the things that I want. I think I'm far more decisive on the things that I want each day. Or maybe the flip side of that would be I'm less able to like have options around those things that I want every day. Right. Therefore, I'm less passive about them.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a different way of putting the same thing, but
right. And I like, even on that too, like, I am just a little bit more go with the flow. Like, if I've thought like, oh, I want it to go like this, or I want to have this, and you're like, oh, I'm making this, I'll be like, okay, cool, I'll have that then too. Like, it's just like, I am way more just like go with the flow. It doesn't bother me. I'm not upset.
We took I think maybe 3-4 years ago. I read this report every probably 3 months. Once every 3 months, I probably read this report. But we did a personality test online, and it was like 45 minutes of answering questions. It's a guy who I
Oh, yeah.
really admire. His name is Ray Dalio. He's written a
Yeah.
few books that
We
I've
should put the personality
read.
test in the show notes.
Sure. Wrote a couple of books, and I like his train of thought. I think he's a really interesting guy, and I think he's super intelligent, and the things he talks about, I'm highly interested in. So his name is Ray Dalio, and he has a personality test that he developed to improve hiring. He owns a hedge fund company in the US. It's called Bridgewater. And he tried to figure out a way that, he could improve his hiring. The people that are coming in as hires, how could I improve that so that there's less people getting fired or making mistakes? And one of the ways he did it was a personality test. Anyways, so I did this a number of years ago, like 5 years ago or something, and she did it a number of years ago as well. And we each took the reports. So I had already done mine, unfortunately, but she did hers. And then I think we switched the reports and we read through them. And we both kind of started laughing because this was one of the major things. Like, one of the major takeaways for me was that, like, I am a leader, go to the front of the pack, make the decisions when I think, and will defend my ideas that they're good. So that kind of person, he calls it a shaper. Somebody who shapes things in the world. And she was like the total opposite of that, where it was like, doesn't want to make decisions, or passive. So it's a really interesting task if you have a partner. I think it's a very valuable thing. Like, it helps me. That's why I say I read it every 3 months, is because it helps me understand me better and where I am good at things based on my personality and where are things I'm not good at based on my personality. So I have a much better understanding of that now. And I'm going to do it again, actually, at some point here and get the results. But that was, ironically, one of the things that came out of that personality test, where we both kind of looked at each other and went, yeah, that is spot on.
And I think, too, like, knowing these things about your partner is really helpful because it allows you to eliminate where you might feel like, oh my gosh, it's so freaking frustrating that they're not doing this, or they won't act on this, or they won't. Like, I know for you, me being more passive, like, I'm more just like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. Like, and for someone who is like a go-getter and like regimented and does things a certain way, it can be like, this is so freaking frustrating. She told me she was going to do this today and she didn't do it today. And then you can get all up in your head and you build up this energy that it can be negative, when it's just like, I'm just more flowy, baby. That's just how we go. And I think, to just highlight this one more time, the fact that you read this every 3 months, and I totally forgot I even did this personality test, just like a prime example. But I was just thinking, I'm like, I honestly would be curious to do it again as well, because I feel like in the last 5 years, a lot of myself has shifted, just because I've had to, because of like learning how to run a business and all of that. Like, I've had to become a lot less like, I'll do it tomorrow type of person, and a lot more like, I need to do it today because tomorrow doesn't exist type of person. So I think I've shifted a lot in that when it comes to business, but I think personality and like just everyday decisions I'm still super, super indecisive sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. There's two I want to bring up next, but I want to talk about this one really quickly, just a few minutes, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Okay.
The first one is risk taking versus being cautious.
Okay. You want me to talk about it first?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm obviously more cautious, but truly, I think the initial thing that comes to mind for me in this situation is parenting for some reason. I think like I'm really cautious around our kids, but then I compare myself to like real helicopter cautious parents, and I'm like, I'm actually not that bad. Like, Aaron has no idea the stuff he thinks I'm uptight for. I'm like, you don't even know. You don't know. You should see some of my friends. It's wild. But I think like for me, that's the first thing that comes to mind when it's like caution versus risk taking. Definitely comes to parenting. I have this weird fear of like my kids being taken from me. So I feel like I need to see them 1000% of the time, and they can't be out of sight. I get like panicky. And so I'm very cautious around like Like, I can't have conversations. Like, he will, the other day we're having a conversation. He's like, I'm going to stop talking to you. I'm like, I'm just watching the kids. He's like, you're not listening to me at all. So that's what comes to mind for me for the caution versus risk taking. But I think in like regular day-to-day life, like I'm definitely for sure more on the cautious side, but I think I'm open to risks if they're explained to me properly. And that's what, like, if I don't have an understanding of something, it obviously seems risky. But if I have a better understanding, or if I believe, like, even when it comes to some different things like we've been talking about recently, it's like I don't have a very good understanding, but I firmly believe in Aaron and his understanding that I'm more open to risks that way because I have faith and belief in him. So it doesn't necessarily feel like I'm the one that's taking the risk, even though like it's a joint thing, but it's not my decision to make. So maybe I'm just like, oh, whatever. If it all comes crashing down, at least it was your fault.
Yeah.
I don't know. But
Yeah.
I'm definitely way more cautious. Aaron is way more open to when it comes to the kids, it's next level. Everything's worked out so far. And when it comes to other things, I feel like he treads lightly, but is way more open to taking risks than me, for sure.
Yeah. I think I agree pretty much 100% on that.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I appreciated about what my dad did for like my brothers and I was he never, ever, ever told us that maybe we couldn't do something or shouldn't do something because you're going to get hurt, or he always encouraged us to do whatever, like just do it. I mean, he would tell us if we were going to seriously hurt ourselves, just like I would tell our kids, but he always encouraged us to try and do stuff. And I think, to be honest, I think his brothers and sisters looked at him the same way you're looking at me, where it's like, holy, I can't believe you let your kids do that or whatever it is. So yeah, that like, I get that from my upbringing of, you know, people just trying crazy stuff all over the time. And I'm not even, in my opinion, my family, I'm not even the biggest physical risk taker. Like to me, my younger brother, Jesse, was, when we were growing up, was way more of a risk taker. He would do crazy stuff on mountain bikes and whatever, like crazy stuff that I would never have tried. So, to me, it's just a natural thing. Are they going to get hurt? Absolutely, they're going to get hurt. But I don't view that as a negative thing unless they're going to get seriously hurt.
I don't view it as a negative thing either. I do want to say that. I've definitely come around to it. But what I will say is that I do sometimes feel like Aaron pushes my comfort zone on it because he allows them to do things a lot earlier than I probably, like younger than I probably would have, or before I feel like they're ready to do something. But it has like always worked out when I think of like our kids on bikes. Even today, Baker did freaking front flip off of the sand dune, like, you know, those 15-foot sand spikes that you're talking about at the beach today. Front flips off of one. Absolutely got hurt. Was complaining about a backache all afternoon after that. But like, that's something I would have never, ever, ever encouraged him to do.
I literally told him to do it.
I know. And he did it and he got hurt, but he was fine. But like, that was something, and I grew up very differently. Like I had a younger sister, and we were not inclined, nor did we care to do anything risk taking growing up. And it wasn't really encouraged because neither of us wanted to do them anyway. So the way we grew up was so different too, that I've never experienced that.
Yeah. And I think like on the other areas of risk taking, I am a risk. I like to like seek out risk where I think it's favorable. I don't just like do ridiculous things, but I like to seek it out where it's favorable. And so I'm more inclined to take risks than you are. I don't know. Maybe that's because I, you know, do a lot more research on things and understand things where I feel like it's not as risky. Whereas if you looked at it and are like, I don't know anything about this, this seems wickedly risky. Like, I mean, we just built a house from dirt. Like, I mean, there's a lot of risk in that. I didn't find it incredibly risky, but it was a draw to me. Part of the draw is the risk. Like, I like the fact that there's an opportunity for more, you know, because there's a little bit more risk if you think there is more risk. But so that's it. Yeah, that one was just a quick one. But another one I think captures us very well is the, 1 being logical side of things and 10 being emotional side of things. So do you want me to talk about that first, or do you want to talk
Sorry,
about that?
you go first, since you'll be more
Okay.
logical about it.
So I think this goes along the lines of the introverted extroverted one, where I said I
Uh-huh.
think I was about maybe a 2 or a 3 on the introverted side, and I think you were maybe somewhere around an 8 on the extroverted side. I think we're very similar on this, where I am much more logical in things.
Uh-huh.
And by logic, I mean without emotion, just flat out without emotion.
Yeah.
That being logic. I'm not saying the logic is correct or anything like that. I'm just saying if there's no emotion on it, that would be like a 1 logic. If there's
And
never any emotion.
you are removing the emotion when you come up with your answer. So it doesn't mean that like, yeah, it's right, or like that your answer is correct all the time. It just is like, there is no emotion. You remove that when
Yeah.
you think
So,
of
and then
things.
I think I would say you're less now. I would say you're a
Yeah.
little closer to the middle on this one, where maybe like a 7 or
Hey,
something.
okay.
On a 7 or something, but I'm not just talking about decision making here. I'm
No,
just
I
talking
know.
generally. Like
Yeah.
I don't display a ton of emotion, whether I feel emotion
No.
or not.
Yeah.
I don't display a ton of that. And I try to lean as much as I can on logic with
Yeah.
decision making,
Yeah.
but there are times where, not the emotional, missing the emotional piece to things is very detrimental.
Mhm.
But I don't think that, I think there's cases in every relationship where maybe you missed the real point. You said, "Hey, what's wrong?" And you come back at me with something, and like, I just totally missed the point of what's actually wrong. Something like that. But I am not by nature an emotional person where I'm going to sit down and we're going to talk about all this stuff or whatever emotion wise, or I'm going to come to you in a panic because, you know, the dog got out of the cage or something. And like,
Yeah.
I'm just not like that. I'm just,
No.
and I'm not saying you're like that. I'm just saying
Yeah.
you're more like that than I am.
Yeah.
And I think definitely, again, this is another really good example of you used to be more like that.
Mhm.
When we first started dating, you were much more emotional.
Yeah. But I
Now,
honestly
I
think
think
like
you've
part of that I
come
would
back.
just chalk up to immaturity too.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
But yeah, sorry, you were saying something. So
I was just saying, I think, over time, this is another good example of we're different and it kind of pulls each other towards the middle. And I think I also have come towards the middle in certain areas of
Mhm.
emotion or displaying or describing emotion. So I've come towards the middle on that. I think you've come towards the middle on that, on maybe being
Mhm.
able to be like, hey, this is an important conversation. I'm not going to sit here and cry. We're going to have a talk. Like, even though I'm really upset or I'm sad or whatever it is, I am going to set that aside for a minute so we can actually have a conversation. So that might be an example of you coming towards the middle. Me coming towards the middle might be an example of like, actually telling you how I feel about something, or I don't think you would ever, unless somebody died, I don't think you'd ever walk in on me just being like laying on the bed crying or something. But,
No.
being able to share it and discuss it is a step for me towards that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, again, this is somewhere else where these differences for the both of us have become things that have been beneficial in the long run of our relationships as well. Because like Aaron used to coach golf, for example. And I feel like along with emotion, I'm very good at like thinking of how that other person might be feeling in that moment as well. Cause I will be like, okay, I get that this is frustrating to you, but have you ever thought about this and what they might feel? And like, if you were to say this to them, like, or I might kind of direct, like, if you're looking for a more empathetic response, because again, when you are someone who takes the emotion out of it and you're just like a lot more black and white, sometimes when you're trying to have a conversation around it, you lack the empathy because you don't actually understand their feelings or their thoughts because you've totally removed them from yourself in the conversation. So I think like I've been able to help you sometimes too, be like, hey, let's remove that. Cause I get what you're trying to say, but let's also empathize with this other person with how they might be thinking or feeling in this moment, because it's a human thing, right? Like, we're not robots. And sometimes I do tell you this, I'm like, you're so robotic. Like, your responses are so robotic because there's no feeling there. And I think that's where like you and I can complement each other. And sometimes you will say like, all you're doing is talking about feeling. Like, what are the actual facts of the situation? Like, where are the facts? Let's talk about the facts. And I get that you feel this way, but what are the facts? If we address the facts, maybe the feelings will start to change, because this is what has actually happened. So I think that we complement each other in this as well, where I can kind of be like, okay, let's think about the feelings here. And you can kind of be like, let's think about the facts here, and kind of create like a meld of the two, you know?
Yeah. I think like my process for thought and like trying to push the emotion aside is not great for, if I were to have a conversation with you about something that was hard for today, or a kid who's on the golf team and something's wrong and they're not doing well.
Yeah.
In the moment where it's like 99% of it is actually just about emotions, is often difficult for me unless I can relate to it and something that I've actually personally gone through. But just to be like, okay, I can empathize that this is hard for you, even though in my head I might be like, this is not actually hard. Like
yeah,
that would be a hard scenario for me, because I want to go to like, let's just solve the problem, and this is going to go away. But after the initial, whatever it is, maybe the first interaction about the problem, that one's a little bit challenging at times for me, because I do want to go to like, there is an actual problem here, and it's not the fact that you're crying, or it's not the fact that you're whatever. That's a reaction to that, which I often don't deal with very well.
Right.
However, once that passes and it's like, okay, we still have a problem, I'm less worked up about it. Whoever the other person is less worked up about it. Let's talk about how we can actually solve the problem now.
Yeah.
Which is so, and again, I think these are things that when I see somebody who's really good at this, I'm often like, wow, I wish I could do that, where they're like, crank on the emotional side and be very empathetic with somebody who's hurting or whatever it is. And they can address that. And then on the back end of that, they go to like, okay, we need to stop this now. There's an actual problem here that needs to be solved, and we are going to work on us to solve this. We got to stop the sorriness. We got to stop feeling all these things. We got to solve it.
Yeah.
I really admire that when I see it, and I don't see it in that many people. So when I do find it, I'm like, well, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So we are different. We are different in that way, but hopefully we can be those impressive people later on.
I have a question for you on this too. Do you feel like having kids has changed you a lot in this area?
What, being like empathetic?
Yeah. And not just like responding with logic all the time is what.
Well, I mean, I think it's different for a 22-year-old kid versus a 4-year-old.
So
like
do you
a
think it's helped you though?
I don't know. I think I am a more emotional person because of kids, simply because they are, our own kids. I mean, like, they bring you lots of joy. They get you very angry at times. They do things that make you want to kill them. Like, there's just a lot of emotions around it. I don't think I might empathize more with the fact that they don't have the skills to deal with whatever they're doing.
Right.
Whereas this is what my point was earlier, a 22-year-old, getting worked up and mad or angry about something that I feel like a 13-year-old kid should be able to, handle. It's hard for me to empathize with that. It's like, you're just missing skills, or you like, so it's a little bit different in that way.
Yeah.
But it has taken me time just to realize, like, our kids just flat out don't have the skills to deal with certain things.
Right.
It doesn't matter what you do. Sometimes it feels good just to, do whatever to them to try to get them to stop. But rarely does it actually lead to something super productive where they're like, oh yeah, Dad, you were right.
Yeah. Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, let's do one more quickly, and then I got a question for you after.
Okay.
So, long-term and short-term thinking.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, you guys can probably guess who in zoo on this one, but for us, I am definitely more of a short-term thinker. I would say my tendency is to be more of a short-term thinker. And again, I would look at this as like a scale. Like I'm probably like Aaron's probably like a 25 on a scale of 10 when it comes to long term. Like Aaron has our life plans till we're like 120. I am probably like 3 out of 10 on this. I would give myself, or like a 4. I'm going to give myself a 4. And Aaron's a 10 plus. He is so long term. I am much more short term. And I think a lot of this also comes from the emotional side of things. Like I think this kind of they play into one another where I am more of a short-term thinker because I am more of an emotional decision maker of like, I want this thing right now, so I want to have it, or this is how I want to feel right now. So this is the thing I'm going to do in order to do that. And, but with certain things in my life, like I definitely am more of a long-term thinker when it comes to like my business, when it comes to our family. But I wouldn't say that I would even say too, when it comes to my health, like the things that I choose to do right now, I tie that to like how I want to feel and be 10, 15 years from now. Obviously helps me in the moment too, but I do tie a lot of like my health and fitness and stuff to like down the road as well. For me, I find that to be motivating. But I think that I have evolved into this person also because I definitely was not like I literally couldn't have cared. Like as long as my bills were paid in university, like I was happy. I just didn't care about anything. I didn't care about saving. I didn't care about anything. It's like, as long as I didn't have debt, like your girl was fine. So, I've definitely evolved in this over time, whereas Aaron definitely has a lot more of a tendency to be a long-term thinker. And I think I'm way more on board with it now because the vision for long term is a vision that we've come up with together. It's not just his vision that I'm living. So I think like I'm way more on board with the long term vision because it's ours. But it used to be something that was so frustrating because, especially when it came to spending money, because I would be like, I just want to go out and do this or go on date nights or like do things and spend money or whatever. And you had this like vision of how you want things to look. And we want to have a house. And we want to have this and we want to do blah, blah, blah. And you tied like a lot of decisions that you would make on your regular day to day to that long-term vision that I just wasn't there yet. I was like, the life's for living. Life that was how I would view things a lot. And I still have more, for sure, way more of a tendency to do that while also, I think, I keep the vision in line a lot more now than I ever did.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I would say for me, I'm very long term on things that are very important to me. Mm-hmm. So a task that I want to do, or a relationship that I'm in, or whatever project that I'm going to start. Mm-hmm. I like to think financially. I like to think very, very, very long term, but I don't think very much about, what are we going to do tomorrow, or what are we going to do next week, or what am I going to do a month from now? Like I spend hardly any time thinking about that stuff. Right. I think down the road on things that are very important to me, like, like what are the 5 most important things in my life today going forward. I'll think relentlessly about those 5 things, but I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about, what are we going to do on Saturday? Whatever. Like, I just don't think about that very much. Like it's not that important to me. Yeah. Whatever we do, I know I'm going to think about those 5 things that I, are important over the next decade and I have goals that I want to achieve just as you do. So I think a lot about those, and none of them are like, in 3 months from now, I want X, Y, Z. Like I don't have too much of that. I think for me, the downside is that I have a hard time like saying, oh, something good happened, we should celebrate it. Yeah. I've always struggled with that. I'm like, no, the main goal isn't achieved yet.
Right.
So the fact that we're a fifth of the way there, I don't see why we should, whatever. So that's always been a little bit, and this is again another example where we kind of balance each other out. That's something you really enjoy and you think about, and so any milestone, there's a reason to celebrate. You're gonna do it. I would never do that, so you kind of make me celebrate some of those things.
Yeah.
And it's rubbed off on me a little bit. So that's, I think you've come along way more.
Yeah.
To long-term thinking over the course of 14 years than I would ever go towards the short-term thinking.
But I think that's fine because you have me to do it for you.
Yeah, I don't need to plan the short-term stuff.
No, I'll keep you busy on the
that.
weekends and you can make me rich in 10 years. It's
something like that. Okay. So I have a question for you before we wrap this up.
Okay.
What do you think is the most important difference between us and why?
Oh, the most important? I actually think that I would just go with the last one that you said, the short-term versus long-term thinking. And I think the reason why this comes to me is I think that it has been the one that has created the most value in our lives because of that exact thing that you just mentioned. I think it has allowed us to get the best of both worlds for our situation in our life. I think that you have helped me create a bigger vision for my life, for what I see, and it gives me a purpose to wake up and work and be excited for every day. And that has sparked a lot of joy and excitement for me in my life because I feel like the vision, the thing we're trying to achieve, we're doing it together. And I wouldn't have probably come up with that vision on my own. It was something that would have needed collaboration and also someone who is a driver of it because of my indecisiveness and my, my ability to be passive and just not wanting to make decisions. So to have somebody who's this is what I see. What if we work on this together and create a vision that's for the both of us, that's long-term that we can work towards? Then in short-term, it allows me to execute because I'm a short-term person too. So I can create the little short-term goals. And then, I don't know. And then I think too, it allows you also have that other side where you're open to just being in the short-term, And
Yes.
We will plan vacations and we'll do things that allow those little sparks for the both of us to appreciate where we're at right now. So I think that would be the one that I would pick, is it allows us to kind of have the best of both worlds where we're still driving for something, but we're still enjoying life. And it's been fun. I don't know if there's a different one you would say, or would you say that's the one for you?
I will 100% agree with that. I think none of the other ones have nearly the impact. So that's definitely the one that I would choose as well.
That's funny.
So we're on the same page there.
Okay, well, good.
Okay, well, I think that's it for this episode.
Yeah.
I thought that was quite interesting. Oh, my light went off here.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think it was quite interesting. Just for me personally, I enjoyed that. But if you enjoyed it, maybe share it with somebody else, or have a conversation with your partner about these things, or take the personality test if that's what you think would help you. Or if you want, maybe go and give us a review on the Spotify or Apple, or go to YouTube and take a look at that. All right, we will sign off for this week, and we will see everyone next week.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.